She stepped off the school bus, boots hitting concrete like war drums. Sunlight sliced through the morning haze, casting her shadow long and solitary across Lincoln High's lot. Whispers ignited around her, fast as fire. Was she seriously wearing that? Not a costume, not a dare. Full camouflage, combat boots. Sleeves rolled just enough to reveal trembling fingers. Someone laughed. A sharp, performative sound that carried over idling engines and teen gossip. Madison Torres, the kind of girl who'd never known silence. Perfect blonde sheet of hair. Perfect smirk. Perfect distance from any real consequence. Phones rose like weapons. A click here, a snap there. Within seconds, her photo began pinging around campus. Captions etched. With digital venom. She thinks it's Army Week? Someone's daddy complex is showing. Zoe Chun kept walking. Her spine didn't flinch. Her eyes didn't shift. But inside, something curled in on itself. Because she'd known this would happen. And she'd done it anyway, because the jacket still smelled like him, David Chun. Staff Sergeant Kier. 3 years ago today, the uniform she wore hadn't been bought. It had been folded. Handed to her mother by a woman in dress blues who couldn't meet her eye, a woman with silver hair and a voice trained not to tremble. Zoe wore that jacket once a year today. She passed a line of football players lounging by their lifted trucks, their laughter bouncing like gravel. One of them, Jake Morrison, quarterback, king of empty spaces, fell into a mock march behind her. Left, right, left, his voice bulged with sarcasm. His friends saluted. One even clicked his heels. 10 hot. Real soldier girl incoming. Needles pricked her skin. Still, she didn't stop. Didn't react. The sleeves were too big. Always had been. The fabric swallowed her arms, even rolled up. But it fit her where it needed to. Over the grief that never went away, only hid better. With time, 2 months at Lincoln High. That's how long she'd been here. Long enough to know that people don't ask before judging. They fill in blanks with mockery. And in senior year, the ecosystem's already written in stone. Castes. Carved from popularity. Bloodlines determined by followers. And today, Zoe had walked in wearing a war. Her locker was in the busiest hallway on campus. A stroke of fate. Or maybe just the administration's cruel sense of humor. She reached it, heart pounding, and froze. A note, taped dead center. G.I. Jane wants attention. Thick black marker, anonymous. And yet not. She ripped it down with more force than necessary. It crumpled in her fist like her throat was trying not to. Behind her, laughter. More cameras. A girl from her PE class, Ashley Kim, leaned in. Is this like for a project or something? Zoe didn't look up. Something like that, she whispered. Her voice a low exhale. Just enough to not crack. The bell rang. She didn't flinch, just moved. 1 foot in front of the other. Because if she let herself feel it, all of it, the ache might hollow her out right there in front of them. And this was high school. You bled in silence. Inside her locker, a small mirror. A reflection stared back, ghosted and worn. But the dog tags glinting beneath her collar grounded her. Tethered her, her father's, still cold against her skin. Still real. By third period, the jokes had evolved. Less spontaneous, more coordinated. Chemistry, her sanctuary, offered no safety. Tyler Brooks, chaos incarnate, spotted her the second she walked in. He'd waited, calculated, as Mrs. Patterson turned her back to the whiteboard. He pounced. A pencil accidentally rolled off his desk. Toward hers. He chased it. Then, with mock clumsiness, swiped her entire desk clean. Books, notes, pens, all. Crashed to the floor. Oops, he said, loud, with a grin. Then louder. Boom. Kaboom. Hands flailing like a cartoon soldier. More laughter. Even the quiet kids chuckled. Zoe's face flushed. Heat, embarrassment, rage. But her hands just moved, collected, organized, Silence was its own armor. Careful there, soldier. Tyler hissed as he knelt, just close enough to twist the knife. Wouldn't want you calling in an airstrike on the chemistry lab. More laughs, but his words landed like shrapnel. She could have stood, could have screamed, but she didn't, because you don't win against people like Tyler by playing their game. You win by surviving it. Lunch was worse. The cafeteria, an arena of eyes. Her camouflage like a flare in enemy territory. She chose a corner table facing the wall. No eye contact, no conflict. Until the royalty arrived, Madison Torres, flanked by Brittany and Chloe, lip gloss, venom, and curated cruelty. They descended on her like vultures with perfect nails. Look, military girl, Madison started, sliding into the seat across from her uninvited. We get that you're trying to be edgy or whatever, but the whole camo thing is not working, Brittany chimed in. You should, shop at normal stores. We could take you sometime. Chloe giggled. Seriously, you're making people uncomfortable. The whole cafeteria leaned in, ears primed for carnage. Zoe stared at her tray, didn't speak. Not yet, but something was coiling inside her tight. Then Madison dropped the match. What are you gonna do? Call your daddy to come save you? Zoe looked up, and in that split second, her eyes said more than words ever could. A silence settled, tight and suffocating. But before she could speak, the sound came, a low rumble, faint at first, then louder. Windows trembled, trays rattled. Phones stopped recording drama and started capturing awe. The sound grew, mechanical, immense. Someone screamed, someone ducked. And then, outside the cafeteria, windows. The sun vanished. A shadow, a black hawk. It descended like thunder onto Lincoln High's football field. Massive, olive green, rotor blades slicing the sky. Students surged to the windows, screaming, filming, teachers shouting orders no one obeyed. Madison stood, slack-jawed. Tyler stared, pale. Zoe didn't move, because she knew that sound she'd heard it in dreams, in folded letters, in memory, and she knew they weren't here for the school. They were here for her. The helicopter touched down with clinical precision. Uniformed figures disembarked, crisp dress blues, medals flashing. One woman led them, silver hair, steel posture, eyes that had seen war. Colonel Sarah Mitchell, her father's commander. The woman who had once told a 14-year-old girl that her father wasn't coming home. The intercom crackled to life. Principal Williams' voice shook. Zoe Chun. Please report to the main office. No one breathed. Zoe stood, straightened the sleeves of her father's uniform, and walked. The cafeteria parted like water. The sound of her boots against the floor changed. No longer mockery, something deeper, something earned. And still no one knew the full reason, not yet. What were they thinking when they called her name over the intercom? Zoe walked slowly, deliberately, through the halls of Lincoln High, halls that had once felt like a maze of judgment and whispers. Now, they felt like a tunnel, a path, something larger than the school's cracked tiles and vending machines humming with static. Students pressed themselves against lockers to make way, their phones raised in silence, not to mock this time, but to witness. Something had shifted. They didn't know what, but they could feel it. Somewhere behind her, Madison and Tyler followed at a distance. She could hear their footfalls, hesitant, awkward, like children trailing after a secret too big to hold. And above it all, the sound of the helicopter still pulsed, a deep, rhythmic thunder. Not loud now, but present, like a memory beating in real time. She passed Mrs. Patterson, who stood in her doorway, mouth slightly open, hand to her chest like she'd just seen a ghost. Zoe kept walking. The uniform that had clung awkwardly to her body that morning now felt like it belonged, as if it had always been meant for this moment. Colonel Mitchell was waiting in the main office, tall, shoulders square, eyes sharp as they had been the day she delivered the folded flag 3 years ago. When Zoe stepped through the door, the colonel's face softened, only slightly. Only enough for Zoe to know this wasn't just duty. It was something personal. "Miss Chun," she said, voice even, words measured like every syllable had been rehearsed. "We'd like you to come with us." No explanation, no permission asked from the principal, who stood frozen beside her because this wasn't a request. This was ceremony outside. The school had transformed. Students had poured onto the football field, climbing bleachers, crowding the sidelines. Teachers had stopped pretending to control them. They were no longer chaperones. They were witnesses. The helicopter waited on the 50-yard line, its blades still now, its body looming like a sleeping monument. Zoe stepped onto the walkway flanked by 2 junior officers. Their movements matched hers. Not too fast, not too slow. They moved as if the moment had weight. And it did. Thousands of eyes turned as she emerged. Phones filmed, mouths whispered, and somewhere in the crowd, someone asked the question aloud, the one everyone was thinking. Who is she? The girl in camo, the one they'd mocked, the one who wore boots like armor. Madison Torres stood frozen beside the bleachers. Zoe didn't look at her. Didn't need to, because Madison's eyes already said everything. She remembered her own words. Call your daddy to come save you. Now she knew that sentence had never been small. As Zoe reached the center of the field, Colonel Mitchell took a step forward. A portable mic had been set up. The sound system crackled, then stilled. The colonel's voice carried across the air, steady and low like a hymn. "Ladies and gentlemen, students and faculty of Lincoln High." No one moved, no one spoke. 3 years ago today, on October 15th, Staff Sergeant David Chun made the ultimate sacrifice while serving in Afghanistan. He died saving 12 members of his unit after their convoy came under heavy fire. Gasps broke the silence like glass. It was real. This wasn't a drill. This wasn't theater. Colonel Mitchell continued, her tone reverent but unflinching. "Sergeant." Chun left the safety of his armored vehicle to establish a communication link. Because of his actions, 12 soldiers were rescued. He was killed by sniper fire before he could return to cover. Zoe didn't cry, not yet. She stood perfectly still beside the colonel, her hands clasped in front of her, her head held high. The tears had already come that morning, quiet and alone. Before the ridicule, before the photos, now there was only presence. The colonel paused, looked at Zoe. His daughter, Zoe, has honored his memory every year since by wearing his uniform. Not for attention, not for applause, but because grief has no schedule, and remembrance is its own kind of courage. The crowd listened, really listened. The phones came down. The whispers stopped. Even the teachers stood straighter. "Today," Colonel Mitchell said, "we present her with 2 honors." She turned to a junior officer who opened a wooden presentation case. The first, an American flag. This flag flew over the forward operating base where Sergeant Chun was last stationed. It was lowered to half staff in his honor and has waited for the moment it could be placed in the hands of his family. Zoe reached out, her hands trembling. Only slightly. The flag was heavier than she expected. More than fabric. It was memory. It was cost. "The second," Colonel Mitchell said, opening a smaller velvet box, "is the Medal of Honor." A ripple passed through the crowd like wind over grass. The highest military decoration awarded for valor, posthumously presented to Staff Sergeant David Chun. She pinned it to Zoe's chest, her father's chest, and leaned close, whispering, "He would be so proud of the woman you've become. His courage lives on in you." For the first time, Zoe's tears fell openly. She didn't wipe them away. They weren't shame. They were honor. The crowd, 2,000 strong, rose in spontaneous applause, not polite clapping, not school assembly noise, but something raw, real, something that rose from the throat and shook the ribs. Zoe looked up and saw faces changed. Tyler Brooks, tears on his cheeks, ashen, silent Madison, hands folded, eyes red. Something in her shattered as the applause faded, the colonel called for a moment of silence, and in that long, echoing quiet, the school changed. Not forever, not in every way, but something had cracked. Some invisible wall, and for once, the truth, the deep, unseen truth of another person's pain, had been witnessed, not ridiculed. When it ended, Zoe turned. The helicopters. Engines hummed again. Louder this time, preparing for departure. She could feel the moments slipping, the ceremony folding into memory. Then Tyler approached. Slow, hesitant, voice trembling. "I'm sorry," he said. "For what I said, for all of it, I didn't know." Zoe looked at him, not with anger, not with forgiveness, just with truth. "He was a hero," she said. "Now you know why I wear this." Madison came next, her face stripped of cruelty. I said awful things." Her voice cracked. Zoe didn't interrupt. She just waited. "I didn't know. You didn't ask." Zoe replied quietly, "But maybe now." "You will." Behind them, the Black Hawk rose into the sky, and with it, a story, a legacy, a silence finally broken not by noise, but by truth. Zoe stood on the 50-yard line long after the crowd dispersed. Alone, not lonely. The metal glinted on her chest, the flag pressed against her heart, and in that quiet, she felt her father's hand on her shoulder, not in memory, but in presence, and she knew, next year, she'd wear the uniform again. But now, they'd understand why. Why do we wait until someone's gone to listen to their story? Zoe sat in her bedroom that night, the Medal of Honor resting gently on her nightstand. Still gleaming in the soft light from her desk lamp, her father's flag was folded perfectly. Beside it, untouched since the ceremony, she hadn't changed out of his uniform. She couldn't. It felt like taking it off might break the spell. Outside, the neighborhood had returned to its quiet suburban rhythm, sprinklers ticking on, TVs humming behind closed windows, the occasional dog barking. But inside her, the world had not settled. She had spent 3 years imagining that day, wondering if anyone would ever understand why she wore the jacket, why she walked silently through judgment and held her head high in the face of whispers. And now that they knew, really knew, the weight didn't feel lighter. It just felt shared. There was a knock at her door. Her mother peeked in, eyes rimmed red, but smiling the way you do when something finally breaks through grief. She walked in holding 2 mugs of hot chocolate, her silent offering for nights like this. Zoe took hers without a word. They sat on the edge of her bed in silence, sipping warmth, wrapped in everything unspoken. "You made him proud today," her mom said finally, voice thin, "but you always have." Zoe blinked, looked down at the medal. "It doesn't feel real," she whispered. That they all saw, that they clapped, that they cried. "It was always real," her mother said. "They just didn't see it until today." That hit harder than expected. Zoe swallowed, her voice breaking for the first time in hours. "I was so angry at them, all of them." Her mother nodded. "I was too once." They sat for a while longer. No moral, no tidy ending, just shared silence and the long ache of memory. When her mother finally left, Zoe lay back on her bed, staring at the ceiling. The ceiling that had held every one of her sleepless nights, every letter she never sent, every conversation with a ghost, and slowly, her mind slipped back, not to today, but to before, the last day she saw him. She'd been 12. It was a cold morning. He had his rucksack by the door and one hand on her shoulder. She hadn't cried, not until after he left. "I'll be back before you know it," he'd said, grinning, then added quietly, "Be strong for your mom. You're braver than you think." She hadn't understood what that meant then, but now she did. Strength wasn't loud. It didn't scream. It didn't ask for recognition. It showed up every day, even when no one noticed. The next morning, Zoe entered the school building differently. No fanfare, no helicopter, just a low hum of fluorescent. lights and murmurs echoing down the hallway. And yet everything felt changed. She reached her locker, dreading what she might find. But there was no note, no jokes, only a small envelope taped carefully to the metal. She peeled it off and opened it. Inside was a folded piece of notebook paper. A short, scribbled message. I was wrong. I'm sorry. Your dad's a hero. And so are you. A classmate, no name, no signature. Just an anonymous act of decency. It was enough. Her fingers brushed the inside of her collar, touching the dog tags that never left her. They felt lighter today. The school moved differently now. Students watched her pass, not with confusion or ridicule, but with quiet recognition. Some nodded. Some smiled. Most didn't say anything, and that was okay, because Zoe didn't want to be the center of attention. She just wanted to be understood. Tyler Brooks saw her near the lockers. He looked like he hadn't slept, eyes puffy and red. He hesitated, then approached. "Hey," he said, his voice lower than usual. "Can I walk you to class?" Zoe nodded. They didn't speak much on the way, but he stayed by her side, not for show, not for an audience, just to walk with her. Inside the classroom, Mrs. Patterson paused when Zoe entered. "I'd like to say something," she said, and the class fell silent. She turned to the whiteboard and wrote in large, careful letters. "Honor is not always loud, but it is always seen. Eventually." Then she turned back and smiled gently at Zoe. "Today's lesson is dedicated to Staff Sergeant David Chun." The class was silent, even the ones who normally joked or whispered behind their hands. No one said a word. Zoe sat down at her desk, and for the first time, it felt like hers. Not a hiding place, not a fortress, just a desk in a classroom with people who now saw her for who she was. At lunch, she went outside to the edge of the football field. She stood at the spot where the Black Hawk had landed. The grass was still flattened in the shape of its landing gear. She stood there alone for a while, just breathing, until she heard footsteps behind her. It was Madison. No makeup today, no perfect hair, just jeans and a hoodie, hands in her pockets, eyes unsure. "I'm not good at this," she said, apologizing. Zoe didn't answer, just waited. Madison looked at the grass, then back at her. "I thought I was strong," she said, "until yesterday, and then I realized I've never had to be Zoe's." Jaw tightened. She didn't want to hate her. Hating took too much energy. "I'm not asking for you to forgive me," Madison said quietly. "I just needed you to know. You changed something in me." Zoe looked at her, really looked, and saw what she hadn't expected. Sincerity, humility, a beginning. "Then make it mean something," she said. Madison nodded. "I will." That afternoon, Zoe returned home and opened the box that held her father's letters. She hadn't looked at them in over a year. She pulled out the last one, the one dated a week before he died. In it, he wrote, "I don't know what will happen, Zoe, but if you're reading this, I want you to remember something. You're going to grow up in a world that doesn't always understand strength, but you have it. I've seen it. Not because you'll fight, but because you'll endure. You'll carry things quietly. And when the moment comes, you'll stand." She folded the letter back up, and for the first time in 3 years, smiled without pain. Because maybe, just maybe, he'd been right, and maybe the world was finally starting to understand. What do you do when silence finally feels safe, but your voice still trembles to speak? 2 days had passed since the helicopter, since the field, since her father's name had become more than just a line in a folded letter Zoe had walked through. The school like someone re-entering Earth after a mission in orbit. Everything familiar but subtly shifted. The colors were sharper, the footsteps softer, the whispers fewer. Even the laughter in the halls no longer curled at the edges with cruelty. But that didn't mean she felt normal. If anything, she felt exposed. Not mocked anymore, not like before, but seen in a way that was almost more terrifying. Before, they ignored her or laughed. Now, they watched with reverence. as if she were fragile, untouchable, something to tiptoe around. She hated that. The uniform was now folded at the foot of her bed, pressed and clean, waiting for next year. The dog tag still hung around her neck, though, always tucked beneath whatever hoodie or jacket she wore. Always with her, not as a symbol, not anymore, as truth. She thought about skipping school on the third day, staying home, disappearing back into silence now that the attention had passed. But something kept her moving, a promise, a whisper, his voice. Be strong for your mom, be stronger than me. So she went, head down, backpack tight. And when she walked through the front doors of Lincoln High, no one laughed, no one pointed, a few nodded. Some smiled. That should have made it easier. It didn't. At lunch, she stood at the edge of the courtyard, tray in hand, scanning the usual tables. She didn't want to sit alone, but she didn't want pity either. Not today. Zoe. The voice startled her, not because it was loud, but because it was warm. Ashley Kim, the same girl who had asked her that first day, awkwardly, "Is this for a project?" Now she stood and waved her over like they'd always sat together. "We saved you a seat," she said. Patting the bench next to her, Zoe blinked. For a second, unsure whether this was a setup, a trap, but Ashley's eyes held no cruelty, just sincerity, and beside her were three others. Students Zoe vaguely recognized from her classes. Quiet kids, good kids, not the type to perform. She sat down slowly. It wasn't a grand moment. No music swelled, no eyes turned. Just a girl in a cafeteria, finally sitting with people who saw her. "So," Ashley said gently, "was she really your dad's commanding officer?" Zoe nodded. "That was amazing. I've never seen anything like that. I cried," Ashley admitted. "I mean, everyone cried, but it just, I don't know. It made everything feel different." Zoe hesitated, then said, "She was the one who told us when he died. She came to our house in full dress. My mom couldn't even stand up." Silence. Not the awkward kind, the honoring kind. Someone across the table, a boy named Mateo, nodded slowly. "My cousin's in the Navy," he said. That hit hard. Zoe looked down at her tray. Then, surprising even herself, she smiled. It was small, but it was real. Maybe sharing didn't have to feel like breaking. That afternoon, after sixth period, she was called into the principal's office. Again, this time, Principal Williams greeted her at the door. He looked calmer than the last time she'd seen him. Less like a man trying to contain a wildfire. More like someone standing in the aftermath of one, surveying the damage, realizing something beautiful had survived. "Zoe," he said, "come in." There was another man in the office, suit and tie, military bearing. Even without the uniform, a calm steadiness that reminded her of her dad's friends from base visits. "Mr. Hart," the principal said. "He's a liaison for a veterans foundation. He saw what happened here. Actually," he glanced at Mr. Hart, who smiled. "He saw you." Zoe's eyebrows lifted. "Me?" "The story went viral," Mr. Hart said. "Someone posted the video of the ceremony. It's been everywhere." She blinked. "I didn't know. We thought you might like to speak at a memorial event," he said, "for Gold Star families. No pressure, but it could help people, especially kids like you." Zoe froze. "Speak?" The thought twisted something inside her. She had spent 3 years avoiding the spotlight, dodging conversations, locking up her grief behind zipped lips and late-night tears. Now they wanted her to talk? She almost said no, almost apologized, stood up and ran. But then, her mind flickered to the note on her locker. The words that had simply said, "You're a hero too." She looked at Mr. Hart. I'll think about it." He nodded. "That's all I ask." That night, her dreams were different. Not haunted, not fragmented like usual, just quiet. And in one of them, her father stood at the edge of the football field, Not in uniform, just in jeans and his old hoodie. He didn't speak. He just smiled at her. She woke up with the sunrise painting her room gold. That Saturday, she opened her laptop and stared at a blank document, no title, no prompt, just space. After an hour, she typed, "Sometimes courage doesn't come all at once. Sometimes it builds quietly in the shadow of grief." And for the first time, she kept writing, not for an assignment, not for school, for herself, for him, because maybe strength wasn't about staying silent. Maybe it was about knowing when to speak. And who you're speaking for. Zoe didn't know what the speech would become, or if she'd actually deliver it. But for now, she was letting the words find her. Not perfectly, not all at once, but steadily, softly, like footsteps across a silent field. What if the world doesn't forget you, but waits for you to remind it who you are? Zoe didn't expect the invitation letter. It arrived a week after the assembly, printed on thick white paper with a gold seal pressed into the corner, her name. Typed in clean serif font, not a spam email, not a DM, a real letter. The kind that had weight. It was from the State Veterans Council, inviting her to speak at the Capitol's memorial ceremony. Thousands would attend, families of the fallen. Soldiers press. Her hands trembled as she read it. She hadn't said yes to Mr. Hart yet. She hadn't even told her mom, but somehow, the world already knew her name. At school, people no longer whispered in hallways, but something else had taken its place. Distance, not fear, not awe, just the kind of silent reverence that made conversations start, then fall short, like people didn't know what to say anymore. She didn't blame them. She didn't know either. That weekend, she found herself sitting on her back porch, hoodie wrapped tight, watching the sky bleed into dusk. A light breeze rustled the leaves, and the air smelled like damp soil and coming winter. Her mom stepped out, holding a mug of tea. "Mind if I sit?" Zoe shook her head. "I heard from Principal Williams," her mom said, "about the invitation." Zoe didn't speak. "I think you should do it." Zoe let the silence stretch. Then finally, "What if I mess it up?" Her mom gave a quiet smile. "You stood on a football field in front of 2,000 people and didn't blink. That wasn't the same." Her mom nodded. "You're right. It wasn't. That moment came to you. This one, you'll have to walk toward." Zoe looked down. "I don't know if I'm ready." Her mom's voice softened. "You won't know until you're standing there. And even then, you might still feel afraid. That's not weakness. That's the shape courage takes before it's named." Zoe closed her eyes. The sound of wind in the trees, the smell of her dad's old flannel still hanging in the hallway closet, the ache in her chest that never fully left. But beneath that ache, something new had started to grow. Not comfort, not exactly. Resolve. The next day, she said yes. The Capitol was bigger than she remembered from field trips, its white dome sharp against the bright spring sky. The front steps lined with chairs, rows and rows of them, and a single podium, centered, waiting. She sat behind the stage with other speakers. Military men in dress blues, a mother who'd lost her son in Iraq, a man missing both legs who walked with prosthetics and an unshakable presence. When it was her turn, someone touched her arm gently. A signal. Zoe walked forward, her boots, the same ones she wore at school, echoed louder than they ever had. The crowd stood. She reached the mic. A hush swept over the lawn. Thousands of faces, cameras, a sea of flags fluttering gently in the breeze. She gripped the edge of the podium, took one breath, and began. "I'm not here because I'm brave," she said. "I'm here because I couldn't stay silent anymore." Her voice was small, but steady. She told them about her father, how he made pancakes every Saturday, how he sang off-key while cleaning his rifle, how he'd write her letters on napkins when deployed, just to remind her she was loved. And then she told them about October 15th, the knock at the door, the folded flag, the words, "He didn't suffer," the silence that came afterward. so loud it drowned everything else. I wore his uniform to school because it made me feel close to him, she said. And for 3 years, people thought it was a costume, a cry for attention. But it was never about being noticed. It was about remembering someone who gave everything and finding a way to carry that without falling apart. She paused. Somewhere in the front row, someone wiped a tear. A soldier stood a little straighter. And then, one day, people saw. They didn't just look, they saw, and something changed. She looked out over the crowd. There are kids like me in every school, quiet, grieving, carrying a story no one asks about. We don't always have helicopters land on our football fields. Sometimes we only have each other, or silence, or a jacket that still smells like someone we loved. She looked down at her father's dog tags around her neck. So if you hear anything today, she said, her voice tightening, hear this. Our stories matter, even the ones carried in silence, especially those. There was a long, still pause after she finished. Then, not a cheer, not a roar, but a quiet, rising wave of applause that swept gently through the crowd like wind over grass. Respectful, earned. She stepped back from the mic, heart pounding, vision blurring, but in that moment, she felt it. Not pride, not relief, something deeper. Belonging. After the ceremony, a woman approached her. Mid-40s, worn hands, dog tags around her wrist like a bracelet. She didn't speak right away, just reached into her coat and handed Zoe a photo. A young man in uniform, smiling in the sun. My brother, she said. Killed in '04. You just said the words I never could. Zoe held the photo like it was sacred. She didn't try to offer comfort. She didn't pretend to understand. She just nodded and whispered, "Thank you." Later, she sat on the Capitol steps, looking out at the empty chairs being folded away, flags being lowered. She felt tired in a way that wasn't physical. The kind of tired that came after finally letting go of something you've been holding too tight for too long. Madison texted her that night. Just one line. I watched. You were incredible. Zoe stared at the screen for a long time, then typed back, "Thanks." She didn't need to say more. Some things didn't need an explanation anymore. That week at school, something remarkable happened. The principal added a new display near the front office. Legacies of Lincoln High. A simple glass case inside. Her father's flag on loan. His photo, a small plaque, next to it. A quote from Zoe's speech. Our stories matter, even the ones carried in silence, especially those. Every day, someone paused there, and every year after. On October 15th, students would wear a touch of camo, just a patch, a pin, a sleeve. They called it Chunday, not to mourn, not to dramatize, just to remember. Zoe never asked for it. She didn't organize it. It simply became, because sometimes change doesn't march in, it walks. Slowly, in silence, until one voice stands still and is finally heard. Why do some wounds stay quiet, even after they've healed? Zoe didn't expect things to feel harder after the speech, but they did. Not louder, not crueler, just quieter. There were no more whispers in the halls, no stares, no mocking notes. But the silence now felt like something else. Distance, hesitation, like people were still trying to figure out how to talk to her. As if she'd stepped onto a higher ledge and no one knew how to follow. She wasn't angry about it, but she noticed, in group projects, people listened to her more. But from a careful distance, teachers looked at her differently too, like she was made of glass, kind, yes, respectful, but cautious, as if one wrong sentence might shatter her. But Zoe wasn't fragile. She was just someone who had learned how to carry weight no one else could see, and lately, it was starting to feel heavy again. It hit her hardest when she visited the cemetery. Just her, a bouquet of white peonies, and her father's headstone. She always came alone. No photos, no posts, just silence and the kind of conversation that happens without words. She knelt, brushed leaves from the base, ran her fingers across the engraved name, David Chun. Beloved father, soldier, hero. I said the words. She whispered, like you asked. She looked down at the peonies. They clapped. They listened. Some of them even changed. A pause. But why do I still feel like I'm not done? The breeze stirred the edges of the grass. Far off, a flag snapped against the pole. She thought maybe he'd answer. Not with words, just a feeling. But all she got was the wind. And a quiet that didn't feel so comforting anymore. Back at school, something strange happened. Something small, but sharp. A new student arrived, fresh from a base transfer, by the sound of it. She wore an old desert camouflage jacket, frayed at the elbows, name patch faded. Zoe saw her during third period, alone, walking the same hallway. She had, just months ago. And then the whispers started, not cruel, but curious. Is she doing the camo thing too? Do you think she's copying Zoe? The irony wasn't lost on her. How fast people forget the difference between attention and grief. Zoe waited by the lockers after the bell. The girl spotted her, flinched a little, like she expected to be challenged. You knew? Zoe asked. Gently, the girl nodded. Yeah, El Paso, originally. My dad was stationed there. We moved after... She didn't finish. Zoe didn't make her. I'm Zoe. I know, the girl said. My mom showed me the video, said you may people. Remember what this uniform means. Zoe swallowed hard. What's your name? Ari. Come on, Zoe said. You can sit with us, at lunch. Zoe introduced Ari to Ashley and Mateo and the rest of the quiet, steady table that had become her circle. Ari didn't talk much, just watched, listened, took small bites of her sandwich like she wasn't sure she'd be staying long. Later, in gym, Zoe caught Tyler Brooks, of all people, staring too long at Ari's jacket. Not with mockery, but with curiosity and concern. After class, he caught up with Zoe. By the water fountain. She's new, huh? Yeah. She okay? She's figuring it out. He hesitated, hands in his hoodie pocket. If anyone messes with her. I got it. Zoe looked at him. He wasn't performing. He meant it. Maybe people had changed. That night, Zoe sat on her bed flipping through an old notebook she used to keep hidden in the back of her closet. It was a journal, mostly, but more than that, a confession space. The pages held every moment she never said aloud. I wish he hadn't left. I hate the silence in the hallway. I don't know what it feels like to hear your father's name from a colonel's mouth. I wish I could stop remembering the sound my mom made when the knock came. She hadn't written in it in months, but now she turned to a new page. Picked up her pen. It doesn't go away. Not really, but maybe we don't have to carry it alone. She closed the notebook softly. Weeks passed. Zoe kept walking the same hallways. Now, with Ari sometimes at her side, they didn't always talk. But there was comfort in walking with someone who understood without explanation. One afternoon, Ari stopped in front of the Legacies of Lincoln High case. She stared at the plaque, the folded flag. Her fingers brushed the glass like she could feel the story inside it. That's your dad? Zoe nodded. Yeah, Ari was quiet. Then, I didn't get a medal. He taught me how to fire a rifle at 10. Said I had steadier hands than most grown men. Zoe smiled. Sounds like a legend. He was, Ari said. In our house. Anyway, they stood there, side by side. Two girls in a high school full of noise, both wearing jackets that didn't fit perfectly, both carrying names no one saw unless they looked closely. And for the first time in weeks, Zoe felt the weight inside her chest shift. Not vanish, not lighten, but share. It wasn't about speeches anymore, or helicopters, or medals. It was about the quiet parts, the unseen strength, the moments where a girl stands next to another girl and doesn't have to explain why her sleeves are too big. It was about presence and knowing that even in silence, You are no longer walking alone. Why does healing feel so heavy when everyone thinks you've already moved on? It had been months since the helicopter, since the flag, since the speech that echoed across the Capitol steps and left Zoe standing in applause she didn't to know how to process. The attention had faded, like all things do. The school year had found its rhythm again. Exams, prom planning, senior pranks. Life had resumed, but grief doesn't, tea work like a school calendar, and legacy doesn't fit neatly into past tense. Zoe still wore the dog tags, still folded the uniform every month, still caught herself staring at the legacy's case outside the main office when she thought no one was looking. Her dad's face, frozen in that sunlit photo, still felt closer than her own reflection. But lately, something else had begun to settle in her chest. Not sadness, not anger, emptiness. A hollow place where purpose had lived. For so long, her mission had been quiet survival. Then, for one surreal moment, it had been truth, broadcast to the world. But now, what was she supposed to do with it all? It was a Wednesday when she overheard two juniors whispering near the library. Wait, wasn't she the soldier girl? The one with the speech? Yeah, the medal girl. I think her dad was like a sniper or something. She still wears the tags, though. It is kind of, dramatic. Zoe didn't flinch, didn't stop walking. But something under her ribs curled tight, dramatic. That word stung in ways the old insults never had. Because now, it wasn't about mocking her pain. It was dismissing her journey, reducing everything she carried into something performative, like memory had an expiration date. That night, she didn't touch the uniform, didn't open the notebook. She just lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if maybe she was holding on too tight, if maybe letting go wasn't to forgetting, just breathing. The next day, during sixth period, she stayed behind after class. The teacher had played a documentary about women in combat. Real footage, real stories. Something in Zoe had cracked open watching it. As the bell rang and students filtered out, she approached Mrs. Patterson, the one who had once written honor is not always loud on the board without saying another word. Can I ask you something? Zoe said. Mrs. Patterson nodded, folding her notes. Of course. Do you think people can run out of purpose? The teacher paused, looking at her carefully. No, I think purpose changes shape, and sometimes we don't recognize it when it does. Zoe hesitated. I don't to know who I am when I'm not telling his story. Mrs. Patterson set her papers down. Maybe now. It's time to start telling yours. It sat with her, the idea that maybe her father's story had shaped her, but didn't define her. That maybe honoring him wasn't about repeating the same rituals forever, but about evolving, living, continuing the legacy by becoming more than the memory. That weekend, she visited the base. Not the one her dad served at. That one was oceans away. This one was local. A small Army National Guard outpost that ran weekend youth programs. She had found it through a quiet search on her phone at 2 a.m. Too restless to sleep. When she walked into the community hall, she expected confusion, maybe pushback, but instead, the first woman she met, Sergeant Rivera, looked at her name and smiled. You, Reed Chun's kid, right? Zoe blinked. You knew him? No, Rivera said, but I watched your speech. You ready to help some younger ones carry their weight? Zoe swallowed. I think so. The sergeant handed her a clipboard, then let us get to work. Every Saturday after that, Zoe showed up. Not in uniform, just jeans and boots. She taught kids how to find their footing during PT drills, how to pack a ruck properly, how to breathe through nerves during orienteering. Most of them didn't know who she was, not the way the world had once known. And that was fine, because here she wasn't a symbol. She was Zoe, A girl who knew how to carry weight and teach others to do the same. One morning, a boy in the program, maybe 12, pulled her aside after drills. He looked awkward, on the edge of tears, his fingers clutching the edge of his shirt like a lifeline. "My brother was deployed last week," he said. "I am scared something is gonna happen." Zoe knelt down to his level. "You done to have to be brave every second," she said. "But you're not alone, okay?" The boy nodded, fighting tears, then said, "My mom cried when she watched your speech. She said she has never seen anyone tell the truth like that." Zoe felt something break and heal at once. She hugged him gently, not because she had the answers, but because she knew the silence he was standing in. Later, walking home, she passed a mural on the side of a building, one she had never noticed before, a girl in camo, half-shadowed, standing at attention while leaves blew past her. Her eyes weren't angry or broken, just strong, soft, ready. Beneath it, a small plaque, "For those who walk through grief with grace and still keep walking." Zoe didn't cry. She just stood there, hand resting on her dog tags, feeling a new kind of stillness settle inside her. Not emptiness, not ache, space, room to grow, room to become, room to carry her father's memory and her own story, side by side, not one inside the other. Because maybe legacy wasn't a torch to protect. Maybe it was a fire to pass forward, and Zoe was ready to burn bright. Why do some stories echo louder after the final page is turned? Graduation came fast, faster than Zoe expected, faster than she wanted. The school buzzed with the kind of giddy chaos only a senior year's end could bring, yearbooks being signed. On every available surface, glittery caps shoved into backpacks, last-minute prom proposals scrawled in chalk on the courtyard steps. And through it all, Zoe moved quietly, not invisible, but deliberate. A presence, not a performance. No one mocked her anymore. That era was long gone. Now, students nodded at her in the halls. Teachers gave her looks that carried more than grades. Respect, memory, even gratitude. But Zoe didn't feel like a symbol. She didn't want to. She was just trying to take one more deep breath before life shifted again. A week before graduation, Principal Williams stopped her outside the office. "We're doing something different this year," he said. "A new tradition, actually." Zoe raised an eyebrow. "We'd like you to be the one who carries the service flag onto the field," he said. "First in school history, in honor of your father, in honor of everything that's followed." Zoe blinked. "Why me?" His smile was soft. "Because you reminded us that dignity doesn't ask to be seen. It simply stands." Graduation day. The sky was endless blue, with sunlight that turned every gown into a ripple of color. The stadium filled slowly. Students buzzing, families waving, toddlers dancing in the aisles, while brass instruments warmed up in sharp bursts. And then, the flag procession began. Zoe stepped out first, not in full uniform, just a dark blazer over her dress, the dog tags still tucked. Beneath her collar, in her hands, the service flag, folded once, held carefully. The crowd rose. Phones dropped. The noise quieted. She walked slowly, purposefully, each step echoing across the stage like a memory carried forward. No music played, no narration explained. The silence was the tribute. The pause was the recognition. She reached the podium, placed the flag into a glass case, the same one that would stay in the school lobby next to her father's picture. She stood still for a moment, let it settle. Then she stepped back and joined the other seniors. From that point on, the ceremony followed its usual rhythm. Names called, applause erupting, caps thrown into air, laughter, tears, relief. But nothing outshined that quiet walk. Nothing needed to, that evening. As dusk turned the sky lavender, Zoe stood in her backyard under the porch light, holding a small box. Her mom watched from the doorway, silent. Inside the box, the Medal of Honor, her father, S-Patch, a photo of them both smiling beneath a summer sun, and on top of it all, a letter. Handwritten to herself, she unfolded it slowly. Read it aloud, quietly. You carried more than your age allowed. You endured more than your classmates ever saw. And when it mattered most, you stood. Not because the world was watching, but because you knew what silence cost. You were never trying to be brave. You just refused to let him be forgotten. And in that refusal, you became something no medal could define. She folded the letter, set it gently back inside. Then, she closed the box and placed it on the top shelf of her closet, not to forget, but to preserve. She didn't wear the uniform again. Not that year. Not because it didn't matter anymore, but because it always would. And sometimes you don't have to wear the legacy for it to live inside you. The next fall, she started college. Communications major, public speaking minor, her scholarship. A last-minute surprise from a veteran foundation she never applied to. They seen her speech, called her a voice the world needs. She joined a campus group for military families. Quietly mentored a few freshmen who lost parents. No spotlight, no speeches, just presence. She started writing again too. Not journals this time. Essays, short stories. One of them, Camo Girl, won a state competition. Her professor asked if it was fiction. Zoe just smiled. Sort of. Back home, Lincoln High kept a tradition. Every October 15th, students wore camo patches. Ribbons, pins, small things, but meaningful. They called it Honor Day. Ari helped organize it after Zoe left, and every year, before school started, she sent Zoe a photo. Students standing in the courtyard, hand over heart, facing the glass case in the lobby. And Zoe would reply with a single line. Tell them thank you for remembering. Years later, she stood outside the Capitol again. Not as a student, not as the daughter of a soldier, but as a speaker, a leader, a woman whose name had come to represent more than just loss. She looked out at a new crowd, faces young and old, and in her opening words, she said, I used to think grief was the end of the story, but now I know. It's just the silence before the next chapter begins. Because sometimes you don't carry the torch, you become it. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts, walks forward, and changes everything it touches.